You know, I've had a lot of people say like, oh, I came not knowing what to expect, figuring I wouldn't understand anything because it was poetry. And then I was wildly surprised when like I completely got everything. And also it sounded like a poetry slam with people being like, you know, and I hear a word like, oh, that's it right there. You know, like we could have it all. I think that's part of it. I think, you know, there's a great line in the play that says perfection is a myth. And I think that that's very much what I want people to take away from it. It's like we are pushing towards these standards that we never created for ourselves in ways that other people shape for us. And like, why? Right? Like when all that you have inside you was enough. When all that you were created to be is enough. I want Black people to write mythology. Like that's it. I just want Black people to I want to write an anthology with Black people who wrote other myths, right? Like I think that I cannot tell the story because Blackness is not monolithic. So there's no way that I can tell every way to be Black. But I think that we can like carve out a whole new genre the way Afrofuturism has been carved out of thinking about like even like Afro past, right? Like and carving out for ourselves what Afro mythology looks like, and Afro American specifically mythology looks like because we had to start a brand new origin story in this country.
All right, what is up, YouTube? It is your boy, your poet, Kendrick Youngblood. I always try to put y'all on game with the best artists in the game, and today we got Deborah D.E.E.P Mouton. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. Just grinding, you know?
Yeah, honestly, and you grind like no other. I got a lot of respect for that for sure. Let me tell you all about Deep before we get started, all right? Deborah D.E.E.P Mouton is an internationally known writer, educator, activist, performer, and the first Black Poet Laureate of Houston, Texas from 2017 to 2019. Plumshuga, The Rise of Lauren Anderson, is her most recent choreopoem, which she wrote and is co-directing with Stage's own Ebony Bell Darcy. She also created original music for the piece with the brilliant composer Jasmine Barnes. It champions the life of the incomparable ballerina who broke ceilings across the world. Her book, Black Chameleon, debuts in the spring of 2023. This stirring new memoir combines new mythology with powerful lyricism. In addition, a storybook opera for young students entitled Lula, the Mighty Griot, which reinterprets one of the myths from the book, was released in 2022 with the Houston Grand Opera and is currently touring schools and community centers. She uses personal mythology as a vehicle for social and self-reflection. She is also currently working in collaboration with Kendrick Scott and Robert Hodge on Unearthed, a performance piece that shines a light on the Sugarland 95 and a new opera with composer Jasmine Barnes for the American Lyric Theater. It is so nice to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, honestly, I can see what you mean when you say that, like, you have a lot on your plate. Like, that was a mouthful. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of respect to you, real talk. And you've always been a very genuine person. I remember when I first met you, I think it was during a VIP arts event, and I was asking where the utensils were, and you were like, "Oh, they're over there, like across the table." And I didn't even realize it was you. I was like, "Oh yeah, thanks." Deep. I was so astonished. I couldn't believe it, you know? Oh man. Yeah. How do you do it all?
I have a great partner. I have, you know, really clear things for myself that I say no to. Strong no's are important. And then, you know, just leaning on God for inspiration, which is important to me. Yeah, I think it's just a combination. Every day something falls and I don't get something done. But hopefully the next day something different doesn't get done and then it feels like balance, right?
Wow. That's actually a great mentality to have. I'm gonna incorporate that, real talk. I'm not just
Yeah.
saying that, really. I need that. Wow.
Well, someone told me like we're always juggling things, but like which ones are the glass balls and which ones are the plastic balls? And like sometimes the plastic balls have to fall to keep the glass balls in the air. So I think if you just like prioritize in that way of like what's made of glass today, right, it can help the balance a little bit.
Wow. Okay. Mind blown in the first 2 minutes. That's what's up. Okay. Now, if you don't mind me asking, what is the story behind the name Deep? I just got to get that out the way.
It's so funny. Everybody's been asking me this lately, which for the first like 10 years of my career, nobody asked me. So, um, it's a combination probably of pompous, arrogant high schooler and then like more meaningful adults. Half of it being like I thought I was gonna be a poetry rock star, and I was like, what will people chant when I come out on stage? Because like people were gonna chant poets in my mind, maybe.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't want it to be just like my name. Like I want it to be something more meaningful. Like I want my work to be deep. Like I want it to be deep rooted and the impact to be deep. And so I was like, well, deep, that's cool. And then I was like, I'm not arrogant enough to think like I could just call myself deep. So I'll make it an acronym that'll make it more accessible for me, mind you, as the person who needed access. And so I was like determined to excel in everything promised. Like for me, I feel like there's been a lot of ways that people have tried to pitch success to me and what success should look like. But then there's a whole separate way that I think that success has been designed for me, and I've been designed for success. And so I think if I can anchor in on really what like God put me on this earth for, what I was purposed for, then like all the other things kind of make sense, right? Instead of just chasing like money or fame or clout, like we're kind of engineered to do.
Right. And the funny thing about that is if we pursue our purpose as opposed to those other things often do come, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And at least that's what I tell myself.
Hey, I'm telling myself the same thing.
So mixed media poetry is something that's always fascinated me, but I've never encountered someone who's done it quite like you. For those of you who might not know, I've actually gone to Plumshuga. I went last week. The best play I've ever been to. Y'all might not know this, but I am a play enthusiast. I love going to plays. They're very fun, very enjoyable, and obviously I love poetry, you know. I just love poetry, but look, this was a beautiful combination of both like I've never seen ever. I gotta ask, has this always been a passion of yours, or did you just decide to venture into this more recently in your career? Tell me about that.
As far as like mixed media, I think that's been like my brand. You know what I mean? I think from very early on, even in slam, I was like, how can we bend this as far as humanly possible? Like you won't let me have props, but like is my body a prop, right? Like you won't let me have music, but like can I just sing? You know what I mean? Like I think I've always been like, how do we make our bodies look like tableau and make them look like a scene? And like what do we build that does something different and new? And so that's I think always kind of just been in my ethos of like how I work as an artist. And if I had an artist statement, that's what it would say. Um, I think though what's happened more recently has been like access and permission. And like it's super we're like we don't need permission, we just make our art. But the reality is like when larger companies start saying, I will write the check to make you do it, you know, it give you the ability to do it. It does do something for freeing the artist to really be able to like unhinge themselves, you know. I shopped this play to at least a half a dozen theaters that were all like not willing to take the risk that stages took in letting me make this really weird, crazy, funky, amazing thing. And I think it just had to have the right partner who was like, I see it, it's weird and it's hard to explain, and like we'll get there, but I'm interested in developing in something that everyone can enjoy. So I'm really grateful to them. And I'm grateful to everybody who kind of like sees me and takes the risk. You know, we're talking to quite a few, or I say we, it's just me. I'm talking to quite a few different collaborators now who all are kind of starting to see my way of life, that there's like something else that they haven't done that would be really amazing to do.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I preach on this channel oftentimes is that as a poet, you are not merely a poet. There's a lot of times where in the process of developing your poetry, you develop other skills that can be vital to promoting your business or career in general. And seeing you just thrive in directing. Also, I believe in the bio, I said you helped with music composition. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the last song of the show, I actually wrote the melody, and then Jasmine kind of fills in the orchestration. And then I wrote all the lyrics for all of the songs in the piece as well.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about right there. As poets, we can be really multifaceted in ways that we often don't realize. Words are the core instrument for like the art we create, hands down, but there's so many other things we can employ, and you really showed that. Like y'all, I didn't mean to promote it quite yet. You have to check this out. I swear, if you are in the Houston area, and I have faith you're gonna make this go far beyond Houston, because Jesus, it's mind blowing. I swear, I'm not just saying that. If I sound like I'm fanboying, you're right, I am. Okay. Okay, so can you tell us the general premise of this play? I was gonna do it, but I think you could do it way better than I could.
Yeah, so you know, Lauren Anderson is a famous ballerina. If you don't know her, get on your game. She has shoes in the Smithsonian, like so it's not just me thinking that she's amazing. She's freaking amazing. And she lives here in Houston. Was the first Black principal ballerina of the Houston Ballet, as well as of any major ballet company in the nation. And so she was 20 years before Misty Copeland, this dark skinned Black woman, shook up all of ballet and happened to become a personal friend of mine in the course of the project. And I just asked her, can I tell your life story? Which is like a huge ask, because who says yes to that? And somehow she said yes. And so we started on this journey that took us about 3 years of really being able to like develop out what it is that we wanted to say. Like she has so many stories, and so it's about, curating which ones are the ones that we need to tell people to get them where we need them to be by the end of the show. And so we just worked together kind of hand in hand. I would send her drafts, she would send me notes. We would go on tours around Houston and look at like places she grew up and, like meet her family. And it just has been really a joy to like build sisterhood, but also to build this really great story that gets to tell you of not only her rise to like this prominent space in ballet, but her struggles with addiction, her struggles with domestic violence, her self-doubt of her own self, like we kind of get in our heads as artists, y'all know, right? And so even like how she has struggled with imposter syndrome and not being enough in a space that's wildly classical and wildly anti-Black most of the time. And so really, pushing us not just towards a space where she's restored, I'm sorry, not just a space she's redeemed, but a place that she's fully restored. I like to tell people that we get to see Black stories all the time where the people get to be like halfway restored. Like I think of the five heartbeats at the end, right? Like he gets to sing in the church choir, but he, what I'm saying, he don't sound right. And so it's like, where's the stories where we get to be our whole selves still, even after the worst things in our life? And I think Lauren Anderson is a beautiful example of where that exists.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it was such a surprise. Oh well, sorry. Let me not spoil the. I'm gonna no spoilers. Godly, I know better. The dancing was mind blowing. Like the choreography off the charts. I was mesmerized. Every scene I was in. And in case you didn't know, Deep, I didn't get any sleep the night before. Zero
Oh,
sleep.
really?
I was working on editing video. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
I was on a crazy tear, and even the night before that, I didn't get much sleep. When I tell you, I didn't yawn once. I did not yawn once during the entire play. I was so captivated. I would look around me every now and then, everybody's eyes laser focused. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And just I don't know. Like, did Lauren have any influence on the choreography, or was it mainly the choreographer who did that? Because I know Lauren, obviously, she's a dancer, so I was just curious.
Yeah. No, Lauren is adamantly not a choreographer. She's like, nope, not my lane. Harrison Guy, and Stanton Wells, who's the artistic director for the Houston Ballet. So, right? Like these two came in and just like caught the vision and ran with it. Can I tell you, into some really beautiful spaces. Definitely talked it through with me, and I kind of gave them. So, like, if you ever see the script, it's like definitely Dakina Moore who plays Lauren. There's kind of like a narrator Lauren who's going to kind of guide you through the show, but she recounts her memories in dance and they kind of come to life on stage. And so for me, it was like important to think about the storyteller notes for the dance. And so in the dance sections, it may say something like, Lauren and her parents enter the home and are playful around the house. But what that looks like when it gets into a choreographer's hands can look like a million different things. And so I think that, where Harrison and Stanton both just shined all over the place was figuring out how to tap into their relationships with Lauren because they both know her very closely. And also to like what it feels like to grow up in Houston and what it feels like to grow up in the South, like and what it feels like to grow up as a Black person who's struggling between two worlds. And they just really tapped in ways that really make the show what it
No wonder it turned out the way it did. You know, there were a lot of great minds and great hands on this
Yeah,
project for sure.
for sure.
So, what was it about Lauren's story in particular that made you want to tell that story? Because I'm sure there were others you were considering. What made that rise among the pile?
It's funny. Everybody's asking me this, and for me, I'm like, I don't know the answer. I think I really like listen to impetus and feel like led to things. And for me, I just wrapped my first opera with Houston Grand Opera around the life of Marian Anderson. I know I wanted to champion another Black woman, specifically one, in Houston, if there was one to champion. I didn't really want to do Barbara Jordan, though a lot of people were like, I heard a lot of chatter around Barbara Jordan's name, specifically with post market in the Barbara Jordan library being converted over. And I was like, I think there's a lot about Barbara Jordan in the world. Not to say there's not a need for more, there always is. But I wanted to find another story. And everywhere I went, someone had a Lauren Anderson story, right? Like it's this really weird Houston phenomenon that I've not experienced with any other artist where if you mention Lauren Anderson, it immediately like conjures a story about the first time they either saw her, met her, breathed her air. Like, I mean, and it'll be like, oh, I met Lauren one time in a bathroom and she was so kind to me. And nobody, I mean, zero people, this is prior to me having, a relationship with Lauren, had a negative thing to say about this woman. And there was no negative stories. And I was like, I don't even understand how this is physically possible that this person has touched this many people's lives and no one is saying, oh man, she's terrible, or she had an attitude, or she was had a bad day. And so the more I just kept hearing her voice, I was like, hey, maybe it's important to just talk, right? Like, let me get to know you. I did a lot of research. I did a lot of watching online interviews. And I found one interview that mentions addiction. And I was like, that might be a nice conflict if she's willing to tell it, right? But you never know if people are going to be willing to tell it because not everybody wants to bear all their soul on a stage. And Lauren just took it like a champ. She just was like, it's time. It's freeing, it's healing, it's necessary. Let's do it.
Yeah, and I think you're the perfect person to illuminate her story in ways that I don't think anyone in Houston had ever gotten to witness before.
I'm grateful for that. I'm happy that I could give her flowers while she's alive and can smell them and put them in a vase in her house. You know what I mean? Like every night that she texts me, like I love you so much, or I'm just overjoyed, or I'm crying tears of joy and I can't stop. It's just like I feel like she's seen. And as an artist, it's all we really want. We just want to be seen. We want to be, the work to mean something. And so I think if I can help another artist, especially another Black woman, feel that way, I mean, I'm going to do it every time.
Yeah. And what impact do you hope Plumshuga has on both audiences and the genre of choreopoetry in general?
So I've been hearing, it's funny that you say the genre of choreopoetry because I think that that's a very in the community understanding I'm learning. Like when we say choreopoem to the media, they're like, this thing that Mouton refers to as a choreopoem. I'm like, no, I don't refer to it. Like it is like Ishange made this whole genre and I'm just following in her footsteps. Like I may do it differently and have my swag to it because I should, I'm an artist. But like I did not create the idea of letting poetry tell a story, right? And so I think that that's like the first part, right? Is like unpacking the fact that we can do storytelling in a different way and that it's valid and it can still be seen and enjoyed and accessible. I've had a lot of people say like, oh, I came not knowing what to expect, figuring I wouldn't understand anything because it was poetry. And then I was wildly surprised when like I completely got everything. And also it sounded like a poetry slam with people being like, and I hear a word like, oh, that's it right there. Like we could have it all. I think that's part of it. I think there's a great line in the play that says perfection is a myth, and I think that that's very much what I want people to take away from it. It's like we are pushing towards these standards that we never created for ourselves in ways that other people shape for us, and like why, right? Like when all that you have inside you was enough, when all that you were created to be is enough, like why would we like give ourselves over to the desires of other people when we can give ourselves over to like the reason that we were made. And so like that's, if there's anything else that people take, if they could just quiet the doubts in their head, if they could put the imposter syndrome down, like that would be a huge win, I think, for this piece.
All right, so you had mentioned finding new ways to tell stories, and one way that I find particularly unique is the use of myth. It's not unique in terms of human history, but it's unique in which the way I've seen you do it. A few years ago, it was pre-pandemic, I distinctly remember you performing a poem / myth. I think it was in Pass It On, which is an event that Outspoken Bean hosts. You did this one myth about women having eyes at the back of their heads. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I did it in TED Talk too.
It blew my mind. I had never seen anything like that because up until that point, the only Black myths I had ever really encountered were either African myths, because I'm African if you didn't know, or John Henry, which is actually one of my favorite myths in general. Like I really love that myth. But other than that, I hadn't really come across something of that nature. So when you hit us with that poem, it blew my mind. And I told myself, because I remember you saying that night that you were going to come out with like a collection of myths. I said to myself that day, and I promised that I would get that collection as soon as I could. I would pre-order it if I had to. And sure enough, I've pre-ordered it.
Yes, so the pre-order. Let's go, New York Times bestsellers list. That's how you get those pre-orders.
Hey, so tell us about it, Black Chameleon,
Yeah, it's so funny. It's again one of those things that I was like, I don't know what this is. I'll figure it out while I do it. I started collecting stories of women in my family, which were like, mind you, really kind of crazy. First, I should probably back up even more than that. I started off doing like an ancestry.com, tried to search through the leaves thing. And this is not a plug for them because I was not successful. Like I hit 1861 like most Black people and was like, and everybody's in slavery. Cool, great. Yay. No chat, couldn't find anybody. For my family, it's either a reservation or in slavery because I have a large indigenous background in my family that I do know, like which tribes, are my family's a part of. But and so I was like, okay, well, if my daughter has nothing, then I should start collecting all these random stories that my mom tells me about the women in her family for her and like just for me to revisit as like remembering who I am. And so I did that for like, a few months, maybe a year of just like writing down the stories as we would like talk about them at like family gatherings or, when I hear my mom and my grandma kikiing in the other room, you know what I mean? Like I would just kind of like be the scribe or the griot in the room and just writing things down. And I got about halfway through and was like, okay, this is great for me, but I don't know why anyone else would want to read this. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, they're cool stories, and a lot of them are funny or are really rebellious, and I love that. Like I found out that Aurelia Browder, who was one of the first women to refuse her to give up her seat on the Alabama bus boycotts, or before the boycott started, was actually kin to me, which is like interesting. So all these like really powerful women are in my history, and I was like, this is awesome and cool, but like nobody cares when I talk about selling a book. And so I went on a podcast with Jackson Neal, who was the youth poet laureate at the time. And Jackson was like, what myths did you grow up with? And I promise you, I had the same answers that you had. Like Kendrick, like I was like, Brer Bear? Like, I don't, like, that's written by a white man on top of it. Like, I'm struggling, man. And I was like, George Washington and an apple? And so I was like, look, this is like not okay, right? Like that I don't have an answer for you. And I'm like, I have a degree in African American studies. I should have an answer for you. And so I started really like researching, and there's this great collection of African American folk tales. And I was like, why is it folk tales and not mythology? And really like the change of that word is just because like they didn't want to give like godlike tendencies to average people that were Black, right? Like it's really the difference. And so I was like, how audacious am I to think that I could write a myth, right? Like that I could backtrack and write one. And I was like, the more I thought about it, the more I was like, maybe we've always had myths. I think of all these random sayings that like women in my family, or the people in my family have said that I've never understood. Like, if the Lord said the same and the creek don't rise. I don't live by a creek. I don't know where that comes from, right? But they've like lived. And so I was like, what if I reverse engineered mythology, right? And took like this saying that has become colloquial, and instead of trying to explain it, I show you why it needed to exist in the first place. And so I started with how women got eyes in the back of their head. And I was like, why would we need eyes in the back of our head? Like, what's the purpose? And it's always, for me, has been referred to as a mother talking to their child. So I'm like, then there has to be some like relationship tendril there that had something to do with taking care of your children. And so I birthed this story about a woman who basically used to gouge the eyes out of her children to keep her from the atrocities of being enslaved, and that like begged the gods for her eyesight back. And after writing that, like I just felt this weird like sense of power over my own narrative. And I was like, what if like I just wrote a whole book of this, So then my goal was like I was just gonna write the myths. But the more I did that, the more I realized that like the context of those myths was why the stories for me made sense with my family. And so I sat down in the middle of my floor and just kind of laid out everything on the floor and just started thinking about like if these two things are in conversation with each other, what do you need to know first that would set the stage for what you need to know next, right? Really like unhinging myself from chronology, and thinking of a more thematic storytelling where it's like I can tell you about when I'm 5 and then when I'm 25 and then when I'm 6, if it all makes sense to how it developed a certain characteristic in me. And then from that kind of became the first manuscripts of Black Chameleon. Yeah.
The idea of reverse engineering mythology, when you said that, I got goosebumps crawling all over my body. because that's quite literally what you did. You took sayings and colloquialisms and backtracked into a story that would explain where they could have come from, you know? That's okay. What was the pitch process like when you were trying to get a publisher to take it?
Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So I first queried through the AWP agent match, and actually got matched like the first time out, which was really weird. But the woman like didn't have capacity for me, so like the relationship kind of ended pretty quickly because she just couldn't manage it. But she was like, I think that you have like these standalone stories and these standalone memories, and there's a voice that's missing in between them, which is like, for me, I immediately was like, oh, it's got to be like the voice of God, but not in like a religious sense, but more in like the all-knowing omniscient narrator sense of like the person who gets to explain why these stories need to go together. And so I was like, well, maybe that's like something I can play with, is like, what is that voice of like Black womanhood as God sound like that gets to explain this to you, and what does she focus on? And so I started really thinking, like, it's funny that God and Black women have so much in common, right? That like, and I say that to mean like both of them just want to be believed, right? And want to be believed in. And that's probably the two things that seem to be the hardest thing in the world, right? To like believe in God and to believe in Black women for some reason. And so I was like, well, in that case, if she's trying to convince you to convert to an understanding of her, right? A belief in her, like what would be the motivations, why she would tell you what and when, and how is that going to shape the narrative? So then I started going back through and like stitching, right? Like then it was like, oh, now I have my through line. Now I understand who's telling the story, maybe even better. And so after I did those edits, I tried pitching again and got nowhere. um, and then I did an event with Writers League of Texas, and they have this really great event, which is like people get to come in, writers get to come in and read unfinished work and get feedback from an audience, which, like the poet in me, the performance poet in me is like, give me all of the numbers, the feedback. I need the data. I need to know it's working. And so I read the story. Actually, I don't think it was the Eyes in the Back of the Head story. It might have been, it's the story of my mom beating the black off my sister. That's the one I read. Because I was like, we saw I'm gonna beat the black off you. I was like, what happens if you actually get the black beaten off you? Like, what would occur next? So I started writing that story, and I read part of it, and a woman who was in like the virtual audience, because this was during the pandemic, was like, I used to be an agent, and I want to single-handedly figure out who to make your agent and convince them that this is a worthwhile book. And within 2 weeks, she had convinced an agent and one of the largest New York agencies that this was a book he needed to sell. And so he read it, fell in love with it, and then we went about the work of like figuring out how to sell it, because I didn't know if it was a short story collection, if it was a memoir, if it was some hybrid form that I needed to make. Was it biomythography like Audre Lorde, right? Like, was it like where was I going to find ground and feeling like I know what to call it? And Retha Powers at Henry Holton Company was like, this is a memoir, and it just needs to break all the memoir things, right? But like, we're going to call it that, and then we're going to show you how far we could bend that form. And I was like, here we go, bending forms again. I'm all in, right? Like, let's go, let's do it.
What impact do you hope Black Chameleon will have on audiences and the genre of myth making?
I want Black people to write mythology. Like, that's it. I just want Black people I want to write an anthology with Black people who wrote other myths, right? Like, I think that I cannot tell the story because Blackness is not monolithic. So there's no way that I can tell every way to be Black. But I think that we can like carve out a whole new genre, the way Afrofuturism has been carved out, of thinking about like even like Afro past, right? Like, and carving out for ourselves what Afro mythology looks like. And African American specifically mythology looks like, because we had to start a brand new origin story in this country. Not one that we asked for, but one that we totally took advantage of and made our own. And so I think us leaning into the fact that we had this horrific thing happen to us, but that it can be the really great fodder for some great stories about life and Blackness.
I actually tried making a myth once. And it was after I heard your myth about the eyes at the back of the head. I was like, I got to try this out. So I collaborated with a short story writer who's also a friend of mine. And we made a little myth. It wasn't even a Black myth. I was too afraid to even attempt that. I didn't think I was ready. I was like, let me just start with the myth. um, you've kind of inspired me to try my hand at that again, because I do think we need more of that. It's not a monolith. The black story, the black narrative, it's multifaceted, and the more poets and artists in general, storytellers who have their hands in it, the more we can actually make this a well-defined genre, that people are forced to acknowledge whether they like it or not.
Well, I have 2 more books planned, so give me the money and I'm ready to go, right? Like the first book is really centered on Black womanist. I really want my next book to be a love letter to Black men. I really do, like what it means to love a Black man, because I feel like y'all just don't get enough love. Like I want to love on y'all. And then the last one I really want to center on like what it means to raise a child, and that even means I think raising your parents in old age. Like I just lost my father, and I just think there's some like revelations in thinking about like this full cycle of life that I would love to be able to wrap in mythology. Um, yeah, I would love to be able to do it. So hopefully this book does really well, and I can go ahead and build from that like at least a little trilogy for y'all. That would be fun.
And man, I'm gonna be promoting it for sure, for sure. Now, were there any inspirations that you took outside of family experience? Did you take inspiration from other myths potentially in creating this one?
Yeah, I used to listen to a podcast that was like myths and legends, and I would put that on like my radio when I was driving to and from work, and just listen to everything from like Japanese mythology to like more indigenous mythology to Irish and Scottish. I mean, like it really was everywhere. Like I remember Mama Toro, I think is the name of it, which is like a Japanese folktale of a boy who was born out of a peach, and then like becomes like one of the greatest soldiers. And I was like, I love this idea of like being born out of agriculture, and so I created a girl who was born out of a gourd, because I was like, it's shaped like a woman, right? Like it has like the wide hips and like the chest, like right, like it just looks like it's gonna be a Black woman in that gourd, right? And so I was like, this idea of like reclaiming even like the land and nature and like agriculture, like something that has been so inherently touched by Black hands in this country specifically, and then using that to pivot into like the birth of a new story. Ugh, great. Like so I think it was like, as I was listening to those myths, I was thinking about the pathways and the entrances in, the structure of what they used. Like there's this really great like thing that I started noticing in West African mythology, which is like they would put like 2 stories together and then say like, who is the most righteous? And then they would never answer it, right? But like they would just like leave that as like the moral of the story is you get to make that decision. And so I played with that in the book. I played with writing parables in the book, because I was like, because the Bible is a mythology, right? So especially in Black culture, like in America, the Bible is a huge part, I think, of like our cultural understanding, whether or not we believe in Christianity or not. It's definitely a huge force. And so I was like, I want to write a parable. Like I want to, like I want to fully like tap into all the possibilities. And I hope that that's just what comes through, in Black Chameleon.
I want to hold off on that question because there's one question I ask every artist I've ever interviewed. Well, we'll get to it in a second. Now, why did you name Black Chameleon? I'm curious about that.
So the original first piece of Black Chameleon was it. I wanted to play with form, and it looked like a blog post, because random thoughts happen, right? Writers, and so I'm writing with my kids, and we're talking about chameleons because they're kids, and they're like, chameleons can turn any color they want to, and I was like, why have I never seen like a Black chameleon? Like, what does that mean if a chameleon, like, can they even do that? So, of course, good old Google, I take it out and I'm like, what happens when a chameleon turns Black? And it's like, it's sad, depressed, and about to die. And I was like, oh my God. And I was like, that is so dark, but also like, why is it that when the chameleon stops shifting into every other color and becomes all colors at the same time, it has to be on the brink of death? Like I feel like there's something really like poetic about that. Is like the only way you can see our Blackness is if we're on the brink of death all the time, and that's just like that's not what's up, And so I was like, I feel like as a woman, as a Black woman, I'm always in a space of either shape shifting or shifting into some other color or some other skin or some other environment, or I'm on the brink of losing myself and dying. And so I was like, I love this idea of like a Black chameleon, and what does it mean to be a Black chameleon, right? Someone who's Black and a chameleon, and having to figure out the balance. And then the more I like nerded out by looking at chameleons, because that's what happens next, right? I'm like, they have 360-degree eyesight. And I'm like, yeah. So do Black women, right? Like that's about right. And then it's like they have this, prehensile tail that can hold on to things longer and heavier and protect them. And their tongue is like this ridiculously long tongue that can stick to things and devour things quickly. And I'm like, it's fast like the tongue of a Black woman, right? Like, come on now, this fits. This is the thing, right? And I just found so many parallels that I was like, this book has to be called Black Chameleon. And my editor, thank God, agreed because I was going to be pretty much a jerk about it.
Oh, you're gonna say it's my way or the highway, huh?
I don't know if I was gonna say the highway, but I was like, can we get a subtitle? Can we find a way to put Black Chameleon? I'd made it a chapter title or something. We're gonna find a way to put it in there.
What recommendations would you give to aspiring artists who are trying to dabble or even excel in mixed media poetry?
Just give over to it. You know what I mean? I think that all of us are mixed media artists. We just limit ourselves because something has to fit in a box. But like, isn't it more fun to just break the box? You know what I mean? Like, isn't it more fun to show people how the thing they didn't expect can work? I guess that's for me is like a place of privilege because I have built a career that was so well known in poetry that when I started to really show people all the things that I was thinking about in my head, people kind of were already a little bit on the fan train, right? Like, and were willing to go with me there. But I think that even from the beginning, start showing people where the limitations are instead of letting people show you where your limitations are as an artist.
I'm just soaking this in because this is advice I need. There's ideas I've had in my head for a while that I've been hesitant to even attempt, and I'm sure a lot of viewers are the same. We just got to do it. Yeah.
I'm literally writing like a TV pilot because why not? Like I don't. It might suck. Okay, like I want to put it out there. Is everything that I write isn't good, right? Like some of these things did not work, and y'all are just not seeing them, right? Like. And then other things, I was like, this is not a short story. This is a novel, and I need to put it to the side because I can't do it justice. I can't do it the justice it needs right now. But I'll get to it, and I don't have the skill set I need right now. But let me think about it a little bit. Let me learn some more. Let me play. Let me like build something out, and then once I do that, I feel like maybe I can. Okay, no, now I'm ready. Now I'm ready. And so I think just for yourself is like I have a long list of project ideas. Some of them I'm fully capable of seeing come to fruition right now. Some of them I need to go learn how to do videography, right? Like some of them, like I need to go teach myself CAD at 2:00 in the morning, which I have done, right? Like, like so I could build set designs, like I think for us it has to be that. And so just give yourself the permission, like you can do it all. You can't all do it all at the same time.
Yeah, very true. It kind of reminds me of the school fun and sleep balance.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Sleep always falls off that one for me.
Same for sure. Okay, now the big question that I was kind of hyping up before: who are some artists you would love to collaborate with in the future, and why?
It is so funny. Today I tweeted, I want to collaborate with Robert Glasper. And I was like, I'm going to shoot my shot in Twitter. I don't know if he's going to see this, but I'm going to say it out loud that Robert Glasper is hands down one of the people I would love to collaborate with. I am always in love with collaborating with Jasmine Barnes. She is like one of my favorite humans, and she is phenomenal. And if you don't know her, you should know her. Of course, there's going to be like the big names that every Black person always says. I think Ava DuVernay is one that I'm like craving to collaborate with. Yeah. I would lose my mind. My friend Marcel keeps saying, he's like, Ava's gonna call you one day. I'm like, stop doing that. He's like, Ava's gonna call. And so like definitely Ava DuVernay is one, and Issa Rae is another. Quinta is another. Quinta Bronson. I really find some beautiful power in like the new renaissance of Black women. Robin Thede, right? Who are making their way into like crafting new spaces in comedy and horror. And then, I have to say this one, Jordan Peele, hands down, 100% of the time. Yes. And Misha Green, right? Like those two, I don't know what happened to Lovecraft Country, but all I'm saying is if I can get my hands on a little bit of writing in any of those, over the moon, y'all would have to come find me because I'll be dead to the world. Yeah, for sure.
All right, cool. Okay, that is actually all the questions I have for you.
Yay.
Now it's time. Promote anything and everything: social media, merchandise, books, past, present, future projects. Go ahead.
Let's go. So I have a lot of projects, but I'm gonna try to keep it to the most recent one. We've mentioned Black Chameleon. Please pre-order. For those who don't know how book sales work, The New York Times bestseller list is based off of how many books you can sell in a single week, and they count everything in your first week as everything that's sold prior to your book launch. So if you've been selling for 3 months of pre-sales, it all counts as the first week, and that's how your book ends up landing on the New York Times bestseller list. So help me get to New York Times bestseller list by going ahead and pre-ordering your copy of Black Chameleon. My website is livelifedeep.com, where you can find out how to pre-order the book, as well as some of the other events that I'm going to mention in a minute. And don't worry, I'll mention that website one more time. Social media handles are at Live Life Deep on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook is Living Life Deep because they hate me, and Twitter is Live Life Deep as well. And then as far as projects go, I have a brand new exhibit opening on October 27th at the Moody Center at Rice University's campus. That's going to be a really great collaboration with myself and local artists who have taken some of my stories from Black Chameleon and turned them into visual art, as well as worked with some local writers to write their own mythology and have those translated into art. And so that exhibit will be up from October to January at Moody Center. So if you have time, come check it out. Plumshuga, The Rise of Lauren Anderson, is already out at Stages Houston. You can buy your ticket. You can fangirl, fanboy, fan all the people out, just like Kendrick would. And you can get those tickets at stageshouston.com. And then the last thing I'll say is, let's think projects. I have a new opera coming really soon, so just watch me. Y'all I have a lot of things happening, and I would love for you to be part of it. I do have a Patreon at Live Life Deep, so if you want to get the inside scoop, the back scene, behind the scenes videos and footage, and even some special workshops that I'm going to be letting out at the top of the year, you can join my Patreon party and we can have a ball. Again, livelifedeep.com gets you all the things that you need to know about me.
All right. Thank you so much. It was a blessing having you. You have no idea.
Anytime you got my number, call me. Let me know what's up.
For sure.